So let's play a game. If you're on the stage and you have never taken a corporate PAC check from Blue Cross Blue Shield, raise your hand. Anyway, all of that is to say,
who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air.
All right, so I caught the Michigan Senate debate. This is the race where Abdul El-Sayed, the Medicare for All candidate, is running against Mallory McMorrow, and the third AIPAC candidate, fully AIPAC funded candidate, who is, I think Haley Stevens is her name. She sucks, which we're going to see later. Mallory McMorrow also isn't great, but isn't as much floated by AIPAC, but was kind of seemed to be courting them or considering the idea of being supported by them. Abdul El-Sayed is fully anti-PAC money, anti-AIPAC, anti-corporate money, all of that, which is the reason that he supports Medicare for All, which is a pretty clear distinction with these candidates. So while Mallory McMorrow isn't as bad as Haley Stevens is, she isn't able to be as good on those issues as he is because he's separate from those corporate interests. So that's what we're going to see throughout this debate, as well as the fact that Abdul El-Sayed is just a great rhetorician, and that's what I'm noticing about him, which is a great asset in these debate contexts. And then we're also going to watch a Fox News clip of a debate that he recently did where he did the same thing, just performed very well. So in this first clip, they immediately bring up the deficit and how, as senators, they would approach issues of austerity. And so in his answer to that, you get a good sense of rhetorically what he's doing throughout this debate.
What does responsibility look like? What do you cut and where?
Responsibility means going through every single budget, line by line, from start to finish. Let's stop just starting with the number that's before us and ask, what do we actually need to do to deliver? What do we actually need to do to provide healthcare? What do we actually need to do to protect our men and women serving abroad? And start from the goal and work back to what that budget should be. That's what we do every single year.
No, let me jump in here, because I think it is important for us to recognize that so long as we continue to play the same corporate game, we're going to get the same corporate prizes. And I'm the only candidate on the stage who has never taken a dime from a corporation to run a campaign and never will. And now here's the question. I knew you would ask a question about deficits, because at the end of the day, every single time we have a Republican administration, they run up the deficit doing two things. The revenue issue, which is they cut taxes on billionaires, and then there's the spending issue, which is we fight stupid wars we have no business fighting. But all of that goes back to one thing: the power of very rich people to buy off politicians to do their bidding, whether it is a weapons manufacturer, whether it is a special interest, or whether it is billionaires who recognize that they can write tax code so they got loopholes they don't have to pay.
Thanks, Mr. El-Sayed.
Nolan, we got to be growing the economy.
Yeah, so I just wanted to leave that little bit on the end there because she sounds funny. We got to grow the economy. Her voice just sounds like that. I don't know. And you can really see the difference between him and Mallory McMorrow here rhetorically. I think McMorrow has some good moments throughout this debate. Honestly, she's not the worst on some of these issues, but in most cases, El-Sayed is just able to speak a lot more clearly and a lot more able to just press on the issue and the rhetoric that, you know, most people agree with. And they get into more stuff later about like the Senate filibuster, which I think has more implications, frankly, on how they would actually be as senators. Like, that's one of the most important things, especially if there's going to be fights between Republicans, and, you know, the beginning of this term at least is going to be while Trump is still in office. So, you know, how the Democratic Party is going to behave oppositionally is not only one of the main things to be determined in this election, but candidates like El-Sayed or seats like Michigan and Maine are going to be some of the key seats in that discussion in terms of whether Democrats are like using leverage in a bold way. So that's one of the most important things to take away from this debate. In this next part, they get into a little bit of, you know, the foreign issue and foreign money and that sort of thing, and that's where you see the contrast in the way they're willing to talk about that subject. So here's
Give us a sense of what would guide your votes on questions about direct use of our military abroad, and how you'd balance that against the need for diplomatic approaches and critical foreign tensions.
Let me tell you what absolutely would not shape my perception. It's AIPAC money, which is being spent already in this race to pump up one of my colleagues on this stage. I'm the only candidate who didn't ask AIPAC for their support. I don't think that our taxpayer dollars, which we pay every April, ought to be going to bomb children, to fund bombs and tanks for other countries when we got kids who can't afford basic things in our own. So when it comes to a situation like Ukraine, where you have a would-be dictator or a current dictator who wants to be a dictator of yet more land and violates the sovereignty of a foreign nation in their neighbor, I believe that that is justifiable intervention. In the case of Israel, in the case of Egypt, who get our dollars, I don't believe that that's where our money should go.
And there's a lot of agreement here on stage that we must end wars, not start them. We must keep money at home, and the best way to do that is to defeat Mike Rogers in November.
So again, Abdul El-Sayed is able to say, I'm not taking money from these PACs, I'm not taking money from corporate interests or things like AIPAC that are influencing my decision. And I think that alone, coupled with the fact that he has a more populist message on these issues, is just something that's very tough for these other candidates to compete with. They can do it with money. They can do it by appealing to more conservative demographics in the Democratic Party. But ultimately, Abdul El-Sayed has the freedom to say what people want to hear from politicians right now. And so even Mallory McMorrow hopping in at the end there and saying, look, we all want, to end wars. We all want no more wars. She's not really saying that America needs to have a tougher and more oppositional relationship with Israel, which the truth is, especially in the Democratic Party, especially animated Democratic Party voters or people that need to be animated Democratic Party voters, that's what they want to hear. And you hear a lot of corporate candidates or less grassroots candidates who are a lot more tiptoeing around that issue and playing politics a lot more with rhetoric like that, but being able to come into office as a renegade and set a new standard for where the center is in terms of rhetoric is something that Abdul El-Sayed can do and these other candidates cannot. So here's the next part where they get into the filibuster and explain their ideas on that, mostly in agreement here, but very different in their rhetoric style. So here's that.
What do you think of the Senate's rules? What would you change and what traditions are worthy of protection? And how do you see the Senate's role in the congressional balance of power?
So I believe we have to abolish the filibuster. We have to expose senators to democracy again so that they have to answer to their voting public about why they took a particular vote, because I know it would change the way that they behave. But this is just one part of the way our democracy has ossified. And I think we need to be thinking about broad picture democracy reform. To me, that starts with taking on the fact that we've just seen the biggest assault from the Supreme Court on the Voting Rights Act in our history.
Thank you. I appreciate the question, and we have to get rid of the filibuster. We are at a place where too often Democrats are protecting Republicans from their own bad decisions. And look, I helped flip control of our state Senate to Democrats for the first time in 40 years. If we had a similar entity in our Senate, we would not have been able to get anything done, and it shows a real lack of trust in the voters. Politicians, elected officials should be able to govern the way that they see fit to govern and then let the voters decide what happens after that.
Pretty similar answers there. I like that McMorrow was able to just come out and say we need to get rid of the filibuster. The truth is that's an easier thing for a Democratic candidate to say. It is something that the base wants to hear and doesn't necessarily scream like establishment Democrat, but it also is a pretty easy thing for them to change their mind about, renege on, and that's kind of the vibe I get, although it is good that the center of the party has moved to we have to get rid of the filibuster. And McMorrow mentions this thing about how Democrats run cover for Republicans and let them get away with bad things. And that's true, but that's not just partisan politics that makes that happen. That's corporate politics that makes that happen. The reason Democrats are responsible for that is because they're answering to their donors. They're answering to the same corporate pressures that are making Republicans vote that way in the first place. So the problem's not going to be solved by a candidate like her. She's closer than somebody like Haley Stevens, but the only real antidote to that problem is Abdul El-Sayed style candidates, grassroots style candidates that are at least funded by people outside of those, political pressure campaigns that can direct political energy in a different direction. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work all the time, but it's a better representative of those things. McMorrow is going to fold to the corporate pressure in power. She's just that type of Democrat. But interestingly, here is Haley Stevens completely face planting and contradicting herself on the issue of the filibuster just for fun. Here's that.
The filibuster must go. The filibuster must go so that we can codify health care. And by the way, Nolan, to your other good question about the debt and the deficit, we should use the filibuster to not allow the big ugly bill to pass that increased our debt and at the same time eradicated
So we're not going to filibuster
Medicaid.
here.
So wait, you said you would get rid of the filibuster, but you also want to use it. Which one is it?
I said I want to remove the filibuster.
Right, but then you just said you should filibuster what's going on with the deficit, right?
I'm saying that I want to change the rules, of which I've been a part of. I voted for rules packages on behalf of the people of Michigan. And I believe, Stephen, what I said is we should remove the filibuster Democrats could have voted down the legislation, the tax bill. That's what I was saying. Democrats should have been able to vote down the tax bill, Stephen. That's why I said we need to get rid of the filibuster. That tax bill should not have
so
happened.
she's just bad at this, terrible at this. And she not only contradicts herself and backtracks, but then she completely lies. She said, what I said was we should get rid of the filibuster so that we could have voted down the bill. That's not what she said. She fully said we should use the filibuster against the big ugly bill, which honestly, I think they should. And really, that's the only thing that makes sense. Get rid of the filibuster so that Democrats can vote down the bill. No, that's not what would happen. If the filibuster isn't there, they just vote the bill through, no problem. The filibuster has actually prevented the bill from going through. So she's really getting mixed up on that. But here's one last moment of Abdul El-Sayed in beast mode here on the issue of healthcare, also showing their difference on the issue of healthcare, which we're pretty used to seeing from Democrats. And then we'll get into this Fox News interview that he did.
Abdul El-Sayed has called for Medicare for all repeatedly during this campaign. What's your answer to rising healthcare costs and increasing access by the citizens to healthcare?
Thank you. What I know is that our residents simply can't afford to wait. To allow any Michigander who wants to opt into Medicare regardless of their age, to create a real public option that gives people choice and that forces private health insurance companies to bring their costs down.
Well, I'll tell you this, revolution's definitely not coming if we're not fighting for it. So let's play a game. If you're on the stage and you have never taken a corporate PAC check from Blue Cross Blue Shield, raise your hand. Anyway, all of that is to say, I think we really can fight for a world where everybody can be guaranteed health care. I think we really should fight for that world because too many people in this country are going without the health care that they need and deserve. $225 billion in medical debt. 225, that's bigger than the GDP of half the states in this country.
Thank you, sir. We've got
No, I'm not done yet.
Now,
I just want to say, no, let me just finish.
Move on.
I just want to say one more thing. It is important for us to recognize that all of these issues go back to how we finance campaigns, and it just keeps coming back and coming back.
Yeah, so that raise your hand moment was the best moment of the debate by far. He should have done that way more times, but I'm glad he got that in, even though it was towards the end. And it's just, it's clear. That's the distinction between him and these candidates, and that really seems to be fueling a lot of excitement around Democrats. Hasn't won in every case, didn't win in the Kat Abu-Ghazaleh case, but in the case of El-Sayed, he really seems to be riding the momentum in a way that some of these other candidates haven't caught. And people thought the Hassan Piker campaign that he did would have knocked him off of that momentum, but it doesn't seem to have. So on that note, here's him being grilled and grilling back a Fox News host, Will Cain, in an interview that he did. This interview did not go the way Will Cain wanted it to, and you could see him getting visibly frustrated. So here is that.
We start with your very own words, that you would like to abolish ICE. Now, what I would like to ask you is, ICE is simply the enforcement mechanism for democratically elected laws of the people. Now, for a party who has talked about the threat to democracy, is it your position that you do not want to see the will of the people, the democratically elected laws, enforced?
First of all, Will, you and I both know that immigration law is not criminal law. Immigration law is civil law. It's like getting a parking ticket. So the idea that we should have a paramilitary force that is weaponized on our streets to enforce civil law seems to me to be a bit over the top, particularly considering the fact that the current president is weaponizing ICE against the idea of the rule of law itself. The idea that they should just be governed simply by Stephen Miller and Donald Trump without any enforcement around basic warrant law or the Constitution itself, that to me is frustrating. Now, I want to pivot just quickly because I do want to ask you, do you pump your own gas?
Well, before we start talking about whether or not I pump my own gas, we're going to
I'd like to just ask
with
you,
your answer.
It's important.
I appreciate
$185 billion.
I appreciate the interest in having a conversation, Mr. Sayed, but what I would suggest is I'm conducting this interview.
So if we want to talk about law enforcement, I do want to bring up the question about the $1.8 billion Department of Justice piggy bank that Donald Trump wants to hand out to people who clearly broke our laws on January 6th. But I asked the question about gas prices because I happened to pump my gas just on Memorial Day. The worst part of my day was having to pay $82.89. Well, I thought about the fact that we lost more than a dozen service members in a war. We never should have been fighting to raise those gas prices in the first place.
But Mr. Syed, we had a very friendly exchange last week. No, you're not answering my question. Is the entire point. You're pivoting the talking points.
I would like to finish
if you will
my
talk
answer. Let me finish my
the question I asked, we can have an appropriate interview.
Let me finish my answer. $185 billion for ICE. That's $185 billion that are not being spent to improve anything from your infrastructure to your kid's school or to help you afford your health care. Gas is just the tip of the iceberg. So if you do want to talk about ICE, let's talk about the opportunity cost of paying $185 billion into an agency that is currently sowing unrest in New Jersey, just like it did in Minneapolis.
What is the cost to deny citizenship?
Healthcare and not fighting.
Do you believe America deserved 9/11?
Donald Trump has started them for the last 3 weeks. No, of course I don't. That's
okay,
a ridiculous. First of all, ridiculous question. Because here's this game. This is why people hate the media. This is why they hate the media. Because you play this gotcha game. Because he said something one time, you think I automatically believe that. Now,
if you campaign with him, if you campaign with him, you're acting like you have a social acquaintance or you debated him. You campaigned with him.
If you want to have an honest conversation, we can have an honest conversation. I answered the question for you. But the idea that somehow you're going to try and take some words out of context and say that that's automatically what I believe to your audience is exactly why people don't believe you, Will.
No, you don't understand. I'm asking you a question.
I mean, I'm just saying, that's where it comes from.
Okay, well, I would suggest to you, as you move forward.
You seem not to like my answer. You don't like the fact that I keep giving you the answers to the questions you really should be asking, which is, what is it that you want to do for the people in the state of Michigan?
You conduct a wonderful interview with yourself, Mr. Syed.
I want to make sure.
So Will Cain did not seem to be prepared for him to dominate the interview in that way. Not really sure why. He says we had a friendly exchange last week. I don't know if that meant over the phone or what. But yeah, I mean, Abdul El-Sayed is good at this. He sounds very natural. He sounds like he's speaking to the concerns of the average American. We'll see how that pans out in all of these different primaries. It's been going different in different places, but I think these swing states are going to be particularly susceptible to this idea of like the populist candidate even further left than some of like the corporate Democrats, where I think the corporate Democrat pitch is working better in more safe blue seats. So that seems to be the pattern I'm seeing. We'll see if that holds true. And, I think at very least people can take notes rhetorically from El-Sayed. He came off friendly and consistently comes off friendly and in good spirits, not mean-spirited, but really gets his point across, doesn't really let people talk over him, and seems to just have the sharpest message in the room. So, we'll see if that carries him through the primary, and I think he'll make a great senator.